Let's play a quick word association game, shall we? Without naming any names, I'm going to describe two hypothetical candidates, and then you tell me which one sounds like a white supremacist. Candidate number one is a white dude, the son of an oil company lawyer, born in 1967 in the wealthiest and whitest neighborhood in San Francisco. Went to a private elementary school and a private university, and in between, he attended a very high end public high school with an overwhelmingly white student body, where during his senior year he could be seen tooling around campus in his very own late model Porsche 911. Candidate number one went into the wine business in Napa Valley shortly after university, with his startup funds coming in the form of an extremely generous loan from the very same oil tycoon for whom his father, who was by this time a judge sitting on the state appellate bench, formerly worked. 6 or 7 years later, he decided to get out of the wine game and enter politics. So he cashed in his chips, divested himself of the company he had started with the money he got from the evil, diabolical fossil fuel industry, thus becoming a multimillionaire in his own right. For his primary residence, because he's got more than one residence naturally, candidate number one lives in a tastefully furnished $6.5 million little fixer-upper in Fair Oaks, California, where the population is 85.5% white and the median income is $88,630 per year. Candidate number one's children have never stepped foot on a public school campus. Candidate number two is a black guy, born in South Central Los Angeles in 1952, the son of a janitor and former Marine Corps sergeant, who saw combat in the Second World War, and after the war's end, he moved his young family from Georgia to Southern California. Candidate number two's father eventually saved enough money from his multiple custodial jobs to afford his own small business. He opened up a cafe in the Pico Union neighborhood of Los Angeles in 1962, when candidate number two was 10 years old. In honor of his distinguished wartime service and subsequent service to his community as a small businessman, candidate number two's father was posthumously awarded the Congressional Gold Medal in 2013. Candidate number two attended public elementary schools, a public middle school, and public high schools, graduating with honor from Crenshaw High in 1970. His performance there was sufficiently superior to earn himself an academic scholarship to an Ivy League school, so off he went to Brown University, where he graduated with a BA in political science in 1974. From there, it was on to law school at the University of Michigan, where he earned his Juris Doctor in 1977. Candidate number two then practiced law in the Cleveland area for the next 3 years and founded his own law firm by 1980, where he continued to practice until 1987, after which he transitioned to a career in radio and television. He began hosting a local talk radio show in Los Angeles in 1994, which went into national syndication in 2002, and he's been in national syndication mostly ever since, aside from a couple of brief sojourns as a local host back in LA. Candidate number two started life with no special advantages of which to speak, except perhaps for good parents who instilled in him a strong work ethic and a love of his country, as well as an abiding appreciation for the principles of its founding. Candidate number two has earned everything he ever got through talent and hard work. Okay, you tell me which of these two candidates is the poster boy for something called white supremacy. If you believe the LA Times and the fake news performance artists in the national media, well, they think it's obviously candidate number two. They will look you straight in the face with complete sincerity and tell you that candidate number one, the son of the oil company lawyer, the guy whose private sector experience consists of being a Napa Valley wine merchant and nothing else, the guy who's never had a non-white neighbor in his entire 54-year lifetime, is the champion of the poor downtrodden minorities. While candidate number two, the man whose family lifted itself from urban poverty into the middle class by the sweat of their own collective brow, the man who stands as a living example of the reality of the American dream, is, to use the parlance favored by the Times and blasted out in a big front page headline, the black face of white supremacy. It's the night before Election Day, so we're going wall-to-wall recall tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Hit the music, Jim Eagle. from high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where if the wind is just right, you can smell the raw sewage from Tijuana and the LA homeless camps at exactly the same time. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And if I seem more excited than usual, it's because tomorrow is the day America's shittiest governor gets thrown out on his ass. To borrow a slogan from our radical leftist friends, show us what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like. Except when we say it, we actually mean it. I'm going to be referring back quite a bit tonight to the 2003 recall election, the one in which Gray Davis was thrown out and replaced by some Austrian weightlifter whose name I can't remember, because our electric bills went up by 300% that year, and he still couldn't manage to keep the lights on. And you may not be aware that California in 2003 was only the second successful recall of a governor in U.S. history, the other one being North Dakota in 1921. So I say, why not celebrate the centennial of the first one by doing the third one? At which point we would have broken the tie with the North Dakotans, and California will lead the nation in Democrat governors thrown out of office by the citizenry, which will be the first time in a long time that California has led the country in something good. But more on that later. In the run-up to this year's recall election, there's been surprisingly little mention of the 2003 recall, and even less actual analysis of the way the events played out 18 years ago. If you believe what the pollsters and the chattering classes are saying, 2003 offers no instructive insights into what might take place with this election because the demographics of the electorate have supposedly changed so much since then. But those people are all full of shit. And as we know all too well, they are congenitally incapable of viewing the world through any prism except skin color, so we're going to ignore them, because they damn well have earned the right to be ignored. And besides, you don't come to this program just to hear rote regurgitations of other people's analyses, because you are the smartest and most erudite audience on the whole interwebs. The first thing we need to talk about with the 2003 recall is that the pollsters got that one spectacularly wrong. If you thought that Democrat-leaning polling firms being wildly mistaken in their prognostications was a recent development that just began in 2016 with the onset of the most destructive virus to hit our fair shores in this century, that being, of course, Trump's psychosis complex, then you would be mistaken. If you thought the first instance of said phenomenon was in the first week of November of that year when Hillary Clinton was busy taking her victory lap while the fake media were feverishly postulating who her cabinet picks were going to be, while Trump was calmly going about winning the damn election, then please allow me a moment to disabuse you of that belief. In the actual event in 2003, Gray Davis got his ass kicked up and down the Pacific coast by his opponent, which of course was the word yes, which wound up winning by 11 points and nearly 1 million votes. Most of the polls in the week leading up to the election had him leading by 4 or 5 points. In the news media, literally no one was willing to openly predict that the recall was going to succeed. And it wound up being not even remotely close. If the 2003 recall was a Karate Kid movie and Election Day was a beach party, then the word yes punched Gray Davis in the dick, then it kicked sand in his face, then it stole his motorcycle and his hot girlfriend. But that wasn't the only part of it that the pollsters and the news media got spectacularly wrong. On the question of who would replace Davis while he was writhing around on the ground with a sore dick and sand in his eyes, it was a two-man race between the aforementioned Austrian weightlifter, who also enjoys knocking up domestic servants in his spare time, and the guy who was the lieutenant governor at that time, a guy named Cruz Bustamante. I always loved that name, Cruz Bustamante. It sounds like the name of some barrel-chested Latin lover from a trashy romance novel. But in reality, he's just a little pudgy, bald Mexican dude whose name is the only impressive thing about him. Just as the pollsters had Governor Davis defeating the word yes by a margin of 4 to 5 points, they had Lieutenant Governor Bustamante defeating the Austrian weightlifter by just about exactly the same margin. So the overwhelming consensus among the people who fancy themselves experts at predicting this sort of thing was that even if the word yes pulled an improbable upset and left Gray Davis writhing around in the sand, clutching his bruised genitals, there would still be a Democrat governor at the end of the day, because our man Bustamante was certain to defeat Conan the Impregnator. Except, then everybody woke up on Wednesday morning and said, whoopsie, we sure screwed the pooch on that one. Hell, we screwed both of these pooches. Because, will you look at those numbers? Not only did the word yes kick the governor's ass by 970,000 votes, but the Vienna sausage monger dropped a 17-point drubbing on the guy who we were fully convinced was going to win the second half of the election. The guy we thought was going to lose, he won the thing by over 1.5 million votes. It seems like we got this thing really terribly wrong, guys. So, do you think maybe we should reevaluate our methods and try to do a better job in the future? Nah, that's a bunch of crazy talk. Let's just keep being Democrat Party functionaries whose job is convincing Republican voters not to show up at the polls. Except let's spend the next couple decades getting even more absurdly bad at our job, to the point where literally no one takes us or our predictions seriously. Ready? Break. Which leads us back to the present day, and the desperation is thick enough to cut it with a knife. The best evidence of how scared the Democrats are is that 100% of their advertising consists of attack ads against Larry Elder. And they've got the fake pollsters tying themselves up into pretzel shapes, trying to portray this thing as being over and done with, which of course stands to reason because Democrat voters are overwhelmingly more likely to vote early and by mail, while conservative and independent voters generally prefer to do their voting at the polls on Election Day. But they have started going to lengths that even I never could have imagined, and I can imagine a hell of a lot. Late last week, on the news updates on local radio, I started hearing headlines like, Governor Newsom has a 20-point lead over his top Republican challenger. Wait, come again? Because Governor Newsom doesn't have any Republican challengers. His opponent, his only opponent, is the word yes. But amazingly, the Democrat pollsters who masquerade as impartial pollsters, it seems they're calling people up and pretending that there's a Gavin Newsom versus Larry Elder election on Tuesday, and reporting the results of that poll as if it is a real thing. Now that right there, on its own, tells you the level of fear that there is that their man's not going to survive. Back in 2003, the Gray Davis campaign was at least tangentially connected with reality, because in his advertising, he never mentioned any of the candidates who were running to replace him, because this is pretty simple political calculus. If you start mentioning the names of the people on the second question on the ballot, the side that doesn't have anything to do with you, you don't do that unless you're afraid of losing. So the Davis campaign tried to make the case that, sure, you're paying 3 times as much for your electric bill as you were last year, and sure, your power is getting shut off for several hours each day because of that disastrous deal I negotiated with Enron, but I'm really not all that bad of a governor. So here are the good things I've done that mean I deserve to keep my job. And how much of that have we heard from Gavin Newsom? Have we heard one single word of, I'm a good governor and you should keep me? Have we heard any attempt at a vindication of his track record? Nope, we have not. Instead, we've heard, Larry Elder is a black white supremacist. Larry Elder wants to take your abortions away. And my personal favorite, Larry Elder is to the right of Donald Trump. Like that's supposed to be a pejorative? First of all, there is nothing right-wing about Donald Trump. Policy-wise, Donald Trump is about as middle-of-the-road Republican as it gets. And Larry Elder isn't even to the right of Trump anyway. Larry Elder, if anything, is a bit of a milquetoast centrist fence-sitter, which is a pretty useful illustration, I think, of how completely off the deep end of leftist radicalism the Democrats have gone within this past decade or so, where if you're someone who's anywhere to the right of Karl Marx or Che Guevara, then you are some sort of ultra-conservative right-wing madman. Gavin Newsom and his people want you to think this is a Republican recall. He can't even say the word recall without putting Republican in front of it, as if calling someone Republican is some sort of scathing epithet. As if you should vote to keep America's shittiest governor in office just because if you don't, he might be replaced by a Republican. The horror! But let's talk brass tacks, shall we? California has been a one-party Democrat state for 30 years now. And do not try to tell me that we had a Republican governor for 7 years, because the Cyberdyne Systems made banger Model T800 was about as conservative as Bernie freaking Sanders. He called himself a Republican when he ran for governor because it was the politically expedient thing to do, not because he was one. In terms of actual policy, once he was in office, all things considered, we probably would have been better off keeping Gray Davis, because that guy was at least a moderate Democrat, albeit a fairly incompetent one. At the start of this state's period of Democrat hegemony in 1992, California was in the top 5 in the country by nearly every one of the standard quality of life metrics, be it the tax burden, the rate of home ownership, the quality of public schools, wage growth, the business environment, the crime rate, the condition of the infrastructure, the cost of living. And of course, there has always been the proverbial sunshine tax. But if you just give us nominally competent governance, we're happy to pay it. Today, on the other hand, after 30 years of one-party Democrat rule, we have gone from the top 5 to the bottom 5 in each one of those same metrics. We have the worst schools, the worst roads, the most violent crime, homeless encampments as far as the eye can see, the highest taxes, skyrocketing energy costs, onerous job-killing regulations, depressed wages, and astronomical cost of living. And what's the sum total of all that? I'll tell you what it is. California became a state 171 years ago. Last year, 2020, was the first time we ever lost population. States that are being effectively governed do not lose population. If there is any hard and fast rule in politics to which there is no exception, that is it. And especially not when it's a state that has the best weather and some of the most scenic locales on the entire planet. People don't leave a place like that in their hundreds of thousands, over 500,000 just last year, unless the place is being run in a catastrophically inept way by catastrophically inept people who are accountable to no one because they've successfully rigged the electoral system so they can never lose. But the recall referendum is the only type of election they still can lose, because it's a nonpartisan election, so you can't use the party apparatus to rig it in the same way that you normally rig every other election. The legislature has been trying desperately to amend the Constitution to get rid of the recall referendum for the past 5 or 6 years now, because it's the only thing that stands between them and 100% permanent, inscrutable power forever and always. This election is the absolute last chance for the good people of California to save our state from the clutches of graft and corruption and endemic institutional incompetence. And make no mistake, if Gavin Newsom survives this recall, he is going to take it out on all of us. He is deeply offended that he has to run this campaign. He has never had to contest a competitive election before, and you can tell because he's not even good at politics. His people had to resort to the absurd strategy of declaring a black guy a white supremacist because they have no idea what to do in a competitive election, because California elections haven't been competitive since 3 decades ago. In California, you were appointed to statewide office by becoming the Democrat nominee. Permanent one-party government benefits no one except the political ruling elites and their patrons and benefactors. Don't believe any lying bastard who tells you this thing is already over and Newsom's going to win in a landslide. If they believed that, they would not be saying it. 3 decades of one-party government, 3 decades of unaccountable leaders who never have to answer to anyone for anything, has turned California into a third-world dystopian shithole. People like Gavin Newsom and Nancy Pelosi, they yearn to live in a world where there is no middle class, where there is only a wealthy elite aristocracy and a poor minority servant class, and they have largely already achieved that dream. We have one more chance to pull ourselves back from the brink, and if we don't take it, there's not going to be any point living in this state any longer, unless you're content to live as a struggling wage slave and then die poor and penniless. And if Newsom survives this election tomorrow, get ready for some heavy retribution, because 2.5 million Californians signed this recall petition, and he fully intends to punish us for it. So get ready for mandates and lockdowns that will make your head spin. Get ready to be never allowed outside your home without a religious obedience muzzle. Get ready to wear the yellow Star of David, or whatever equivalent they wind up coming up with, if you want to go out in public without having been vaccinated. Or we can decide to say in one voice, just like we did in 2003, when we threw out a governor who looks like frickin' Ronald Reagan next to this fucking clown, who hadn't done a fraction of what this guy has, that you can take your ass back home to Fair Oaks, take your hair gel with you, and we'll even buy you some frickin' throat lozenges as a parting gift, as long as we never have to hear that god-awful voice or see your goddamn stupid face ever again. Thanks for watching. See you Wednesday. Don't forget to vote. Ignore the fake media and the fake pollsters. Save California for the Californians and get off my lawn.